Hey, everybody, welcome back to another week of Between the Lanes. We're so glad you're here, and it's going to be another great conversation with you, Daddy-O.
I agree.
Ready
I
to do
love
it?
these conversations with you. So
We're glad you guys are joining us, and so today we're going to jump into a topic that will appeal to everybody, okay? Everyone who's listening or watching, this applies to you because you know why? We're all in a season. Everyone is in a season, and when you're in a season, it's you don't know how to define it. Oftentimes, you don't know when you've come into a season, and suddenly you're going through something. It's like, oh, I'm in this season. You don't oftentimes know what causes you to come out of a season, but there's purpose in the season. There's work that God is doing in our lives, and one of the things that's important. There's two ways of viewing this. It's viewing it so I can understand the season that I'm going through. But the other part is I, as a leader, need to understand seasons so I can help other people go through those seasons properly, give them perspective about the seasons. And so we're going to talk about 6 different seasons that are part of our lives in growth and development. Dad, what are your, have you been through many seasons in your life?
yes, this is part of what caused the development of this whole idea is recognizing the Bible talks about them, but life talks about them. You know, we understand seasons in the context of, you know, the 4 seasons that we experience in a year, and the changes in those seasons. But and there's, as parents, there are developmental seasons that we walk through as parents and into adults with our kids. But there's spiritual seasons, and that's really what we're talking about today. Is the seasons that impact us from a spiritual perspective, and we may not have had this kind of terminology to identify it, but if you're watching today, as Todd said, you'll go, oh yeah, I know that season, or I've been in that, or I'm in that season now. I had somebody recently tell me, can you be in more than one season at a time? And, you know, unlike weather seasons, you can in these seasons as well.
Yeah, I mean, God only instituted 4 seasons for weather, but we've decided there's 6 seasons for for spiritual and the spiritual seasons. Okay, yeah, you know, I can think back, and I think one of the most valuable exercises that we did organizationally was to actually go back and put a label on different seasons of the church. And I'd encourage you, you know, there's a great resource, StratOps. They got a bunch of different tools, and one of the tools actually has you go back and label your seasons. And so whether you do this organizationally or you do it just in your life, getting a hindsight perspective about, man, what are the different big blocks of time, seasons that God has had me in, will really be insightful for understanding the journey that you've been on with the Lord. But let's talk about where a person might find themselves today and the season. So I'm going to start with one that is, you know, in fact, we'll probably build to the most fun season will be at the end.
Yes.
Okay, how about that? We'll keep that one at the end. maybe the least fun is the dry season. Yeah. If you're just in a dry season, you know, you're not hearing from the Lord, you're not getting direction. Spiritually, it's kind of like, you know, in the Old Testament said, the word of the Lord was rare in those days. You know, it's like, I'm not hearing something from the Lord. Talk about what dry seasons look like.
Yeah, so much of our life and the things that we do in life are lubricated by our emotions, by the things that we sense and feel. And in a dry season, there's not the lubrication that is normally there with confidence and purpose and those kind of things. It's just dry.
Yeah.
I'm going through the motions emotionally. I don't feel, you know, and sometimes in this you can say, I'm just a hypocrite. I'm dry. I'm acting in one way, but I'm not really living the measure to which I'm indicating that I'm living. That's a dry season.
Yeah. Yeah, you're in that season, and what it feels like is I'm putting a lot of effort into the routine, the discipline, but I'm just not feeling anything.
Right.
And one of the things that God is really testing in us in that season is what?
Consistency.
Consistency.
Will you keep doing? So, there's so many analogies in life. Will you keep doing what you know is right, what God has said, what God has told you? Will you keep doing it, believing that if you keep sowing seeds, the crop's eventually going to come up. If you keep watering your field, eventually the seed will break through. It's consistent. I had a guy not long ago say to me, I had spoken at a church and I had talked about hearing God. And he came up after the service and said, yeah, I don't think I hear God like you do. And I said, well, tell me about your quiet time. And he said, well, yeah, before COVID, I was pretty consistent, but since then it's been kind of, spotty at best. And I said, well, part of the dynamic of hearing God is consistency. You have to be consistent in seeking God. The Bible says we're to not seek, knock. Be consistent. And so if you go, well, yeah, I read my Bible and I prayed. I spoke to God, 3 days or 2 weeks, and nothing happened. Oh, that's what happens in a dry season. You consistently continue to do, and you don't feel the inner working.
Yeah. So in that season, the action that we have to do is keep being consistent.
Correct.
What God is doing during that season is creating faithfulness within us.
Right. Exactly.
And teaching us and showing us what it is to be faithful when there may not be a sign of anything else. And I feel like a lot of times, now I'm going to equate it back to weather seasons. A dry season, you can call summer a dry season. And it comes after spring, which is a plentiful, fertile season. And so I think a lot of times people, because one of the battles we will face when we're in a dry season is discouragement.
Completely.
We're discouraged. We're not hearing things from the Lord, or we're not getting vision or whatever. And it's not uncommon that dry season may have just come off of a very fertile season, like a spring type of season. And so what we have to know in this type of season is don't get discouraged. What might God be teaching us in being faithful in a dry season?
I make some application from these weather related seasons, because I think about the summertime. You come out of the spring, everything's green and lush, it looks beautiful. And as summer begins to wear on, the heat turns everything that was beautiful brown.
Yeah.
And it's like your yard's burdened up. There's not the beauty. Well, it doesn't happen overnight. You move into it, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and it's like, where did all the greenery go here?
Yeah.
And it happens. And so you may look and say, it wasn't long ago I was in this green, watered, everything was beautiful season, temperatures were moderate, and I'm burning up here.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yep. So we've painted the picture of what a dry season is. And in that, what God might be doing, the discouragement, the sort of spiritual battle we might face of discouragement during that season. Take us to the next season. What's another season we experience?
Well, I don't know if these are built upon or if they're just, they can be independent. But the next one that I think of is a waiting season. It's a season in which you've done everything you know to do. You've planted the seeds. You've given your best effort. You've done all that you know to do. And what you're looking for in that is fruitfulness, a crop to, hey, when do I get the benefit of everything that I've done in this? And it's like, just hold on,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and like what God's doing, training in us in the dry season of creating faithfulness, the action we have to do in this season is exhibit that faith.
Yes.
So the benefit of a dry season is God is sort of churning in our heart the issue of faithfulness and what that looks like, so that then in a season like this, what we get to activate as we're waiting, again, it's not dry anymore. There's something we've got from the Lord. There's been some level of inspiration or revelation or vision, but there's no realization yet. And so what we have to lean into our action is to still steward faith.
Yeah. When I was living in Amarillo, we had some friends that lived up in the panhandle of Amarillo and Dalhart, and they did farming. And I was so interested to spend time with him, because in different seasons, there was different work that he as a farmer had to do. And so I'd go up, and it would be, what he would be doing post dry season is he would be, he'd be out with a tractor, he'd be working the fields, preparing to plant the seed. And then sometime in the mix of that, he'd plant his seeds. And then during a lot of the spring and summer, he would be putting out water hydration stuff. He didn't have the pivot irrigation, but he would be irrigating fields and stuff like that. And some fields he just dry farmed, and he was depending on rain to come.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of what happens in these seasons. We move out of the waiting into this season, and we say, okay, I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the.
You're anticipating what's to come, but there's no fruit.
Right.
Anticipation without fruitfulness, and that's a tough place to be, which then speaks to the spiritual battle that we engage in when we're in a waiting season, because we're hopeful. There's hope that's being stirred up in us. God has sort of put something in us that we know what is to come. There is something to come. We have faith for that. Hope is welling up inside of us. We're anticipating, yet there's no fruit. And so the battle that we wage in spiritually is what?
Self-pity. We have to guard ourselves against the process of comparing. Maybe it's comparing somebody else's field. They're not in a waiting season anymore. They've started to, their crops started to come up, and we're still waiting. And it's like, I work harder than they do. Yeah. I'm a better farmer than they are. Why am I not producing out of this? And self-pity sets in, and the spiritual battle that's behind that is the enemy comes and points a finger and says, "Nah, yeah, you're right. You're no good." And we start feeling sorry for ourselves, and that turns us in response to God. It's like, God makes me mad. He's not no fair.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking too about, of course, Joseph's life is a series of seasons that, of course, one of my favorite books, Pastor Robert wrote on Dream to Destiny, thinking about all the different tests that we go through. But a season I was thinking about as you were saying that was, because this is where self-pity can come in comparison, is when Joseph was in the prison. Yeah. And he gave a word to the baker and the butler, and he said, "Hey, when you guys get out, just don't forget about me." And they get out, forgot about him. And I think that's, so in waiting, people are at different paces. Someone might, again, if you just make the exact comparison with Joseph, you're relying on somebody else, and they may fail you. They may not come through for you as you thought, and so it's prolonged your waiting.
Yeah.
Joseph was in prison even longer than he probably thought he needed to be, because those guys failed him.
Yeah.
So he's got self-pity, he's hurt, and yet God had a purpose in the waiting for him just a little bit longer, that obviously we know the end result for him. But, so expand a little bit on kind of your perspective about the self-pity and what that looks like for comparison, because I feel like that's where most of us probably the longest, I feel like, of these seasons, maybe because you're waiting, so it feels like it's a long time.
Yeah.
But that can be so varied by people, and so what really sets in is, and it can be, so then we struggle with covetousness and jealousy of other people that are aspects of our self-pity.
Yeah, and I think for me personally, when I've been in this season, this is the hardest season for me because I start feeling sorry for myself. I start thinking, is it really worth it? I mean, is this isn't fair? And I have to battle that to move me back into the place of faith to say, God's faithful. He won't let me down. I'm trusting in Him. I believe in Him. I have to keep that perspective to not let self-pity overwhelm me.
Yeah. And so that's the reminder for someone watching, listening today, is if you find yourself in the waiting season, I wish I could give you all these other steps to do. Keep being faithful. Keep doing what you know to be true. That anticipation will yield fruit in due season. So don't grow weary in doing good. Don't be so self-reflective that you are suddenly weighed down with discouragement and sorrow as you're waiting. Don't let that happen. Let faith and hope arise in you. And that may be part of what carries you into the next season. So,
right. When I think about this season of waiting, when you're living your life based on something you feel God has promised you, something that you're hoping for. The hope is, being
stirred up in you.
Stirred up in you. It's easy to put a time frame on that and then become activated out of God's timing. I believe that there's a process. God's will, done in God's way, according to God's timing, produces God's result. Those 4 steps. Well, you miss any one of those 4, you're going to be in trouble. So, when I graduated from college, I thought I knew exactly what God was going to do in my life. He was going to put me in a position to run my dad's company. So I started into that process, and I waited 7 years, and to me that was forever. And I thought to myself, I think I need to be looking around. I think I need to do something else because this isn't happening. And I think when you take matters into your own hands, what you risk is getting out of God's placement, on God's purpose. And the greatest thing that God can do for you in a season like this, a waiting season, is to, if you will trust in Him, that's the faith piece, you'll trust in Him, is to sort of hem you in so you can't take matters into your own hands and mess something up. He has plans for you, and He's giving you a promise that He will fulfill. And the only way to get out of that is to step out of this process, God's will, done in God's way, according to God's timing. Well, you say, well, God's timing isn't my timing.
God's timing is taking too long.
Yeah, he's taking too long. You remember, this is what cost Saul the kingdom.
Yeah.
He was waiting for Samuel to show up, and
took Samuel
an extra
to the 11th hour.
Yes, an extra bit of time, and so Saul took matters into his own hands and messed everything up. Yep. And I think, so I'm thankful. I can look back to these seasons and say, I recognize the impatience of waiting in my life. But I've been careful, and part of my prayer in this, in waiting, is to say, God, don't let me mess this up. Don't let me act out of your timing and miss what you have for me in this. So I had a friend that recommended I go to work for IBM. And I said, they're not going to want to hire me. He said, well, can I put your name in? So I said, sure. So I started interviewing for this sales position in IBM, and my prayer was, I'm not smart enough to figure this out, God. If you don't want this for me, I need you to close the door, because if it remains open, I'm going to do this. Well, in the process of this, if you're being tempted to move on your own time schedule, change the prayer. Make it a prayer that says, God, I'm not smart enough to figure this out. I'm not smart enough to know what you want me to do, but I'm going to trust in you. And so if you don't want, I'm knocking on this door, and if this isn't what you want me to do, if this change is not according to your plan, then I'm asking you to deadbolt the door.
What I love about that is, I think the issue with waiting, I had someone tell me this one time, that in a waiting season, the question is, view it like not just waiting like I'm sitting there doing nothing, but waiting like, hey, I'm a waiter.
Yeah.
I'm still serving. I'm active in the waiting season. And I thought it was a great picture when you think about waiting, because it's like you're not trying to move forward past what God is doing, but you want to be doing something that's activating so that God can help steer you, direct you in what he's wanting you to do. And so the challenge is that I'm not moving forward past God, but I'm moving enough that in the waiting, I am waiting, serving, and in that serving, God makes clear what his timing is.
It's an anticipation.
Yeah.
Growing up, we had a dog that it was a family dog, but it was really my mom's dog. It was a golden
Aren't they
lab.
all really? Moms really take care of the dogs.
It's true. Right. It's true. But it was a golden lab. His name was Duke. And no, he's a chocolate lab, but his name was Duke. And so my mom trained him she would take a dog biscuit and set it on the end of his nose. She'd say, sit, Duke, sit, sit. He would sit. She'd put a biscuit on the end of his nose. And I mean, you could just see the dog's eyes were completely crossed looking at this biscuit. And my mom would say, wait. And as he waited, he would salivate. I mean, this drool would be coming out like this. And as it did, my mom would say, wait. And he didn't snap that biscuit until she said, okay.
Yeah.
And he would, I mean.
And Swapper would go everywhere and say, yeah.
When I think of that process and that you're talking about, it's it's not a passive, folded arms. I'm not doing anything.
God's going to show up for me? I'm just waiting on God.
Yeah. It's an active anticipation.
Yeah. Because the other thing I feel like is when your heart really is submitted to God and you desire to do his will and you're trying to move at his pace, that I believe even if you get out a little bit, God will redirect you. He will accomplish his will and purpose in your life. So it's more likely that you will move forward with God in a waiting season by moving forward than it is sitting there and waiting on God.
Yeah. He'll put, if your desire is to be in that path, God's plan, done in God's way, according to God's timing, then he'll pull the reins back. What you have to do is make sure that you don't say, no, I'm bolting on here.
Yeah.
And if you'll do that, then you can be active in your anticipation. Okay, God, is now the time? Is now the time? Can I have it now? And
Yeah.
That's
I was even thinking on your Saul example, that's where the famous statement, to obey is better than sacrifice, because what Saul had done is he had sacrificed because the timing, Samuel was supposed to get there and do the sacrificing, and Saul wasn't even go off to battle, but Samuel hadn't done the sacrificing yet, and Saul's like, okay, we got to do it, but at least I'm sacrificing.
Yes.
I'm sacrificing, which is a God thing. God wants a sacrifice, and that's honorable to God. Samuel shows up and said,
Yeah.
Obeying is better than the sacrifice. And so that obedience in the waiting. So, all right, let's talk about the next season.
Yeah. So, and there can be overlap in some of these seasons, like there is even in the weather seasons. But the next one is a grinding season. In the grinding season, it's like I'm hustling.
Yep.
I'm doing everything I can. It's an attitude that says I'm I believe God's going to bless this, but I have to do the work.
Right.
I
I think of startups. I think of entrepreneurs. I think of people who are very clearly having a big life change or whatever, and it's like you're starting something new. That's a grinding season.
Yeah. When I was still in business, one morning I was reading in my quiet time. I came across Ephesians 3:20, and I had been dealing with an issue of I want more. I want more sales. I need to hit more of these targets, and I had set goals for myself that I was sort of in the process of achieving, and I came across Ephesians 3:20. Now unto him who's able to do exceeding abundantly above all that you could ask or think. And I thought, is that really true? If God, I can think pretty big. And I felt like in that moment the Lord was saying, you can't think bigger than me. So I said, okay. So I had been tracking my sales on a chart. And so I remember writing on this chart the first month with no goals. And so what that meant to me is I stopped adding up my invoices. I still did my work, still planned my work, called on my customers. I just didn't worry about the results. And I periodically in that month, with the first month with no goals, I said, God, it's yours. I walked out of this account with no sales. That's on you. I made the call. I made the presentation. I asked for the business. It's on you. Well, in that month, my sales up until previous to that point, it was 1.5 times more in that 1 month. And I went, wow, This is amazing. I love this. So the next month, I didn't quite work as hard. And it didn't fall back to where it fully was, but it fell back enough that it got my attention. I said, Lord, what's the deal?
Yeah.
And he said, I said, I'll bless you. You still have to do
the work.
It's like, okay. It's a partnership here that we're working on.
Well, and I think about, maybe this is generalizing or stereotyping when this particular season happens, but I feel like it's typically when you're younger. I remember the grinding season for me, and when I look back at my 28 years career, I feel like the time I was most grinding was in the first 6 years.
Yeah.
It required a bunch of moves. I was moving all over the place. Blend and I had just gotten married. We're moving different locations. I'm doing different jobs. And that level of movement hasn't occurred since. But what I was doing was I was building diligence in my work. That's what I was doing. I was learning what diligent work looked like. I was learning how to, I was sort of adding to my tool belt. What are the things that are going to be part of who make me up that God is leading and guiding me on? God, I look at it and I would say at that time of my life, I felt like I was a spiritual opportunist. If God opened the door, I went through it.
Yeah.
And that and there wasn't really any, parameters on that. He moved us overseas for 2 years. I was willing to move and go in the grinding season. And what that did was it allowed God to put a bunch of tools in my tool belt. And I think I would encourage people who are, and that's not just when you're young. It could happen at any time. I just feel like typically it happens a little bit more when you're younger. And what I try to encourage young leaders to do is take advantage of those opportunities. I'm not saying it was, of course there were aspects of fun, but a lot of times people aren't willing to make some sacrificial steps of change in your life. That really in a grinding season, there's really no better time than when you're younger to have that grinding season, because all the stuff that comes later in life, whether it's kids and you get rooted and anchored down, it's hard to move about. So if you have those opportunities, God opens those doors, then diligently pursue them. And as you're doing that, what you're doing is diligence, working out diligence in your life. What God is doing is he's building up your endurance.
Yeah.
What does it look like to endure through a very, hectic, busy, building type of season?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying there. The only sort of nuance I would add to it is whenever there's new initiatives, you're prone to being exposed to a grinding season because new initiatives bring new efforts in order to find the breakthrough that we've been talking about.
So what is what's the battle the enemy tries to bring your way whenever we're in a grinding season?
Well, it's spiritual discipline. It's like, okay, I can't do what I feel like today.
Yeah, I'm so busy. Do I have time for my quiet time?
Yes.
I don't have time to give to the Lord. When I was in that dry season and nothing was going on, I was in the Word. I was worshiping for 3 hours, every morning. Then all of a sudden, the fruitful season begins. You're grinding. The work's there, and grind, and you forget the spiritual disciplines.
Yeah, and so important. Everything matters. So I think sometimes God would say to us, "Hey, I miss you." In a grinding season, it's like, remember me?
Yeah,
we were partners in this. Remember,
I was thinking that exact word as you were saying that was if we can look at Jesus as our partner in all of these seasons, then particularly in this season, you're grinding, but you're doing it with your partner.
Right.
Well, you got to meet with your partner. You got to talk to your partner. You got to hear from your partner.
Yeah.
Look at Jesus as that source during a grinding season.
Yeah. We've got 3 more of these seasons that we want to talk about, and we're going to do that in the next podcast. So you want to join us and really slide into what we'll be talking about the next time we're together. We'll look forward to that. Todd, why don't you lead us out in prayer today?
Yeah. So just a reminder: if you're in a dry season, listen, just continue to be pursuant of the Lord, faith-filled. If you're in a season of waiting, just know that God's waiting with you. He's your partner in this season. You just continue to be faithful. And if you're in a grinding season, listen, the hustle will be worth it. Let diligence be at work in you, and that endurance will produce something if you keep God as your partner in the process. So let me pray for you. God, thank you for the seasons you take us through, and thank you that you are with us in each one of them. God, I pray that you would reveal right now the season that we're in, Lord, and as we put that label on it, it helps us to see what you are doing in that season. It helps us to see what actions we need to take during that season and how to watch for the schemes of the enemy as he tries to come against us in that season. So, Lord, guide us, and Lord, let us walk with you through this season. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
God bless you. We'll see you next week.